There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean Breathes Books. Welcome back to my channel and another Friday Reads, and look at my new tie-dye shirt. My friend and very recent patron, Kathy, made this tie-dye shirt for me. I don't think I have had a tie-dye shirt since I was a teenager, so this makes me feel very young and fresh. Thank you very much, Kathy. She asked what colors I like, and I said green, so here we go. How lovely. Matches my glasses, eh? Look at that. Look at that. Oh, wow. My dear friend Lindy of Lindy's Magpie Reads. I don't know if she still does, but she used to wear a lot of tie-dye, I think. So I think she might like this. Anyhow, I am in a great mood. I've had a wonderful week, reading-wise and otherwise. And so I have a couple things to tell you. Really only one thing to tell you that's newsworthy, and that is, I have alluded to a couple times taking my landlord to court. I mean, it's not a court. There's a special branch of the government that deals with landlord-tenant issues, disputes. So that kind of a court. It's a step below court, but it does have legally binding authority to adjudicate such matters. And I won my case. They tried to raise my rent exorbitantly with no notice or very little notice, which made me start to research what the law is about rent increases and how much notice you have to give and all this stuff. And I initiated a complaint, and there was a telephone hearing, and the decision came by email Friday, and I won. So they can't raise my rent nearly as much as they intended to. Plus they have to pay me a couple $100 in damages for my emotional distress over all this. Now, will they? We'll see. They have 30 days to comply, and if they don't comply, I'm not sure what my recourse is. Apparently I can take it to small claims court or something, and I'm not sure. Let's just hope, it's a Western Canadian real estate company. Like, it's a really big entity. I'm sure they don't want to play around with, damaging their reputation by not paying me a measly couple $100 for all the work I went to see that through. So my many years working as a paralegal served me well. I am not to be trifled with in legal matters. So very happy about that. And it's not really news, but the only other thing I want to say personally is how much I love the fall. The fall is here. I mean, I had a shitty summer. All I did all summer was cough. And I mean, I was coughing so much I couldn't really go out into public for most of the summer, so that detracted. But I think in a couple different books recently I've read characters or writers opining on the fact that summer is for children, and adults mostly don't like summer, and boy, can I relate to that. And I'm sure there's a lot of you adults out there that are shaking your fist at me saying how much you love summer. Well, I hate summer. I hate the sun. I don't like being out in the sun. So yeah, summer is just the worst season for me. So it's over. Plus I have my health back. And boy, I had one of the best days out and about in the city of Saskatoon that I've had since I moved back a couple of years ago, yesterday. And it was quite bookish. I met an old university friend for lunch, and then we walked around downtown. I walked him back to his office, and then I caught a bus over because I had to meet Dave Carpenter, the Western Canadian writer who I've been doing a series of interviews with. I just wanted to pick up a book of his. So Alina, I've got it. But I was early. I was about an hour early. So I phoned. He wasn't home yet. So I just sat in this little area that had a whole bunch of benches right at Five Corners, which is, there is literally five corners. It's one of those intersections where you can go any which way. In the Broadway area of Saskatoon on a sunny fall day, and read and listened to my audiobook for an hour. It was glorious, and people watching, and I have not sat outside other than to make videos and enjoyed being outside and kind of in the world rather than in my own apartment. I haven't enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed that hour. It was just delightful. So I may never have an hour like that again in my life, so it's worth noting. I'm very much of an indoors kind of person, is what I'm trying to say. Before we get to this week's fabulous mystery guest, let me also say that I recently, like maybe a week or 10 days ago, hit 5,000 subscribers. I eventually made it. I didn't think I'd ever get that many. I'm very appreciative of all the subscribers. So that is a milestone. And then tomorrow, I think, is my 7-year anniversary on BookTube since I started my channel. And I usually make a big fuss about this, but I'm kind of over making a fuss about such things. So, plus I have no money to do any giveaways or anything. So, just acknowledging it and moving on. Thanks everybody for your support over. I know there's a handful of you that have been here from the very beginning, and a trickle of new viewers coming in all the time, and I'm not going anywhere. So let's just carry on, shall we? What a great mystery guest I have for you this week. And this week's mystery guest is one of my favorite people on Bookish social media. This is Nora from Dublin, here to talk about many fabulous readerly things, but especially her readathon, which is called Spinster September. Welcome, Nora.
Hi, Sean. Thank you again for having me. So happy to be here and to chat with you today.
Yeah, so Nora, this is not Nora's first appearance on my channel. Her first appearance was a zooming in discussion we had about rearranging our bookshelves, and I still haven't done much rearranging. I think everything is still in the same chaos it was, but it was still a rousing discussion, which I very much enjoyed. And I have taped a chat with Nora for my bite-sized book chat series about a novel, and that series has kind of fallen through the cracks, but that's coming soon, I hope. And here Nora is back as a mystery guest. So, Nora, you don't look. I'll forego that joke. I was about to say you don't look spinsterish to me at all, but
I mean, you can. I mean, what does a spinster look like? We need to
well,
break that stereotype.
you tell me. So tell us about Spinster September, and if you don't mind, start by telling us how this came to be, why your interest in the topic.
Yeah, so Spinster September started last year. It was a sort of birthday project for me. I wanted to have like a special project, I guess, reading project for my birthday, and had a strong interest for spinster lit because it's the kind of literature I'm always looking for, because I'm looking for stories of women who are making their way out of conventions, out of getting married and having kids, and I'm always interested to know what they do with their life when they don't have kids or get married. And so last year around my birthday, I sent a post on Instagram asking people if they'd like to join me into that reading project, and they sort of took off from there. And I'm doing this year again, the same challenge. So the challenge is really really relaxed. All you have to do is read a book. It could be just one book. It could be as many books as you want during the month of September. And the book has to feature a unmarried woman. And it could be like the main character. Her spinsterhood could be the whole point of the story, but it could be just an unmarried woman, or it could be like a side character. So really, as long as the book features an unmarried woman, that works. And this year we have a group read, and we're reading Rhine Journey by Schlee. This was originally published in the 1980s, and I think it was a contender for the Booker Prize. And it has been sort of forgotten, and Dawn Books and McNally Editions have republished it this summer. So that's how it came on my radar. And this is set in the 1850s, and it's about Charlotte. So she's a spinster, and she's on holiday with her brother's family. She's like the nanny of her brother's kids, and they go on a trip on the Rhine journey. And during that trip, there'll be, I think, things that will sort of bubble under the surface for her, a sort of awakening. So that's our read this month. And if anyone wants to join me reading this one, you can message me on Instagram, and I'll add you to the group chat.
I'll have all of Nora's social media details in the show notes, including maybe some links to some of the specific posts where she talks about Spinster September. So, can you remember a specific book or two that kind of got you into this topic, into the developed this interest for you?
Huh. I really can't. I just remember a feeling in my late 20s and 30s where I knew, I knew I didn't want to have kids, and I was kind of anxious about it. I knew it was not an anxiety about whether I wanted kids, it was an anxiety about how am I going to give meaning to my life. Like it felt like society was telling me that the ultimate way for a woman to have meaning in their life is to have children, and anything compared to that was not didn't seem like, I don't know, didn't seem worth it or that big of a deal or anything. And that sort of gave me a lot of anxiety. And I was like, oh, I really need to make my life worthwhile, which I don't know. Now I'm thinking about it, I feel like this is a very typical early, when you enter your 30s, you have those sort of existential crises. But I was looking around in films and I just couldn't find anything um, that gave me that sort of an example of that kind of life. I always felt like it was treated as a joke, like the crazy cat lady, and I felt like there was never, I never could find those complex stories. And I found out about the interwar literatures, when in the UK during the Two World War, there were a lot of surplus women, so they couldn't get married because all the men were at the front. And so the writers at the time picked up on that population, and they saw that there was an opportunity here to write about a specific audience here. And I really connected with that literature. I felt like those lives were complex, but also it felt like they were at a moment in time where things were moving very fast for women, because men were at the front. Women had to join the workforce, so there was a change of statuses for women, a change of gender role, a way to redefine their gender expression and gender role. And I felt like what we're going through, even though it's not as drastic as joining the workforce for the first time, I feel like there's big shifts at the moment when it comes to conversation around gender role and gender expression. So I really felt connected with that genre, and I found out about it. I can't think of the book that was the gateway to it, but I found out about it through blogs like Simon Thomas, Jackie Wine, Heaven Ali. Also, the I think it's My Library Thing has a Virago page. So that was for me the resource to find those books.
So spinster is a bit of a controversial word in the sense that it's kind of a derogatory word, and I think that, tell me if I'm right, but I'm pretty sure that you are reclaiming it and using it in a certain way in quotes, because the reading that you're inviting us to do is not just about women who chose to be single and not have a family in that era, but before that and after that, right up to the present day. And the word spinster is, unless it's used ironically or jokingly, is not really used anymore.
Yeah, I think that for me at least, there's a desire to look at the word and see what we can make of it. I'm thinking about the way the word queer has been sort of reclaimed in the gay community, and make it, I think it's a difficult word when it's applied by somebody else. If somebody tells you you're a spinster, that sounds pretty violent to me. But I think if we look at that word and if we decide to use that word, I think there's something quite interesting about it, especially when you think about the origin of the word. I think it's pre-industrial era in villages in England and stuff. Women who were not married, their role in the village was to spin wool. So there's a sort of social role attached to the origin of the word, which I find interesting, because it means maybe there's something community-wise that single women can aspire to, and there's something, of course, spinning wool is a bit limited, but I think that there's something there that can be explored and reclaim that word. When it comes to contemporary books and finding unmarried or spinsters in contemporary books, it's obviously harder now to really define that word, because spinsters, when you think about Barbara Pym's novels, for instance, they're very definable in the sense that anything after 28, you're sort of past the age of marriage. And today, obviously, the marrying window has completely exploded. And as women, we're not tied to our status or married status as used to be. So I think really, as I was saying before, spinster is something that you should define yourself. It's not something that somebody can define for you. So in that sense, finding contemporary books about the subject is a little trickier. So that's why I say unmarried women or women who don't have children. I think it's probably easier to think in those terms. But one I can recommend that is about a contemporary spinster is Drive Your Plover, The Bones of the Dead by Olga Tokarczuk. And it's translated by Antonia, Lloyd-Jones. So this one is about a woman who is in her 60s, I think 50s or 60s, and she lives in a remote Polish village, and she's sort of entangled with a sort of murder mystery. But she's a great character in the sense that she lives her life on her own terms. And those are the books that I personally always look for, because in spinster lit, generally, there's a lot of tragic stories of women who are not happy with their status and they're longing for romantic relationships, and those stories are interesting to read. But I always try to find stories of women who came to terms with it, where maybe it's been difficult maybe to get there, but now they're living for themselves and finding a way to make a meaning for their lives. And I think Janina, the main character, is a great one for that. Another one I always recommend for me, she is the blueprint of a spinster lit. For me, this is Lowly Willows by Sylvia Townsend-Warner. Again, another spinster who is, she did her duties. She took care of her brother's kids. She's been the nanny. She wasn't unhappy about it. She did what she had to do, but now comes the time for her to find her own path, and she does it with such gusto. It's just such a joy for me to read this one. It's like, yeah, it's my favorite one. Did you read that one?
Yes, I did. I loved it until it got a little woo-woo, not woo-woo, but a little too something at the end.
Yeah, the end. I know the end is controversial. I personally love it. I love things that gets weird. Yeah,
that's why you like me.
Yeah, that is why. Yeah, I just like a woman who does weird stuff, unexpected stuff, and if she's unlikable or she does things that disturb, I think it's all the better for me. That's why I like to read about. What else can I think you can't talk about spinster lits without mentioning the foundational spinster lits writers that are Barbara Pym and Anita Brookner. Actually, these are the only two I read from these authors. So, but I have a feeling that from what I could read, Anita Brookner has stories more about women who are longing for a relationship, what I would call the romantic spinsters, women who are really not happy with their spinsterhood. And then Barbara Pym is a little bit comedic, I think. Women who are often entangled with the church, they're taking care of the church community, and their lives are sort of dedicated to somebody else and tend to forget themselves a little bit. Such is the case
often
here.
falling in love with the curate, the hot young curate.
Yeah, there's always a hot one, isn't it?
Nora and I were talking offline about the fact that it's difficult to find spinster lit in outside of Western literature. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think first, a lot of spinster lit is focused on the interwar period in the UK. That seemed to be a very UK-ish thing, I think, the surplus women thing. And if you think about women writing about lives outside of marriage and having kids, I'm gonna guess that maybe culturally it might be harder if you're from outside of Western countries. I'm also thinking that publishers who are pushing minority voices to audience is quite a recent thing. So I'm thinking that those stories must exist, but maybe they're sold as a sort of book about a minority experience and not maybe specifically sold as the experience of a single woman.
And I think also that the social space that's constructed in various cultures is quite different. So yeah, it's a challenge to find. I'm going to be talking about a work of spinster lit from China later in this thing, and also I'll keep the viewers in suspense till I get to that point. But I was quite delighted to find out about it. So
Mm.
Nora, you've got some other books to recommend. Let's hear about those now.
So yeah, last month in August, it was Women in Translation. So I had a lot of fun reading lots of translated fiction. And something I knew I wanted to do was to sort of combine women in translation and spinster lit, because I knew Spinster September was coming up and I felt like I needed to have a few under my belt before the month starts. So I have two here that combines the two genres, and I specifically picked two Japanese fiction because I think you have a
Oh,
strong connection with
yes.
the genre. So maybe you have read them. So the first one is Yagi, Diary of a Void, and it's translated from the Japanese by David Boyd and Lucy North. You read that
And
one?
I haven't. I know of it. I have not read it.
Okay, so Diary of a Void is about Miss Shibata. She's 34, so she's really on the cusp of spinsterhood. She is a overworked office worker. She works in a paper manufacturing office, and she has very long days. And the issue with her work, she takes care of sales management, is that she's the only woman in her office. And as such, it's been sort of inferred that she'd have to take care of all the menial tasks in the office, such as clearing empty coffee cups, making the coffee, tidying up the meeting rooms, emptying the bins, blah, blah, blah. So her days are super long. She's super fed up. She's super exhausted. And one day she sort of blurts out when one of her workers asked her to tidy up the meeting room. She says, well, no, I can't. I'm pregnant. So she starts pretending that she's pregnant in the hope that people will finally have some consideration towards her and treat her like a human being. So she goes with that lie. And
Fascinating.
she is a very interesting concept. She finds, that there are positive and negative to it. First, she realizes that she's still not considered as a human being because people are like giving her unsolicited advice on how she should eat, how she should exercise. It's all about what she's carrying rather than being a person. And they touched her belly, so it's really uncomfortable to come to that realization. But she also starts taking care of herself. Now she has shorter days, so she finishes at 5 p.m. and she can go to the supermarkets, and the supermarkets is not like completely pillaged. So their stuff, they are produced on the shelves. So she started buying like fresh produce and she started cooking for herself. She joins a prenatal exercise class. She meets friends or through that class. She has community. So in some ways, this whole pregnancy lie is completely changing her life for the better. And I think this is an interesting thing that Emi Yagi does here with that book, with that character, with her very peculiar situation. She also mirrors the way pregnancy is in our society as a place where women feel like they're allowed to take care of themselves, to put themselves first because they're pregnant. And it's a very, I think, specific place in this capitalistic society we're in, where we're not really allowed to take care of ourselves in pregnancy maybe is that space for women. And it's not as straightforward as I'm making it to be. There's an element of ambiguity, which I think makes this book extra special, and it really stayed in my head a long time afterwards. There's a lot to think about.
Wow.
So the other book I read in August is Strange Weather in Tokyo by Hiromi Kawakami, and this is translated from the Japanese by Alison, Mark, and Paul. How about this one? Did you read it?
No, but I've always been in love with that cover photo.
Yeah, it's great. I have to say the story is not as magical realism as the photo seems to suggest, but it's a really beautiful picture. And this one is also very much focused on loneliness in the city. We have here again one very overworked office worker, Tsukiko Omachi. She's 37. And very much like Miss Shibata in Diary of a Void, her life is dedicated to her work at the office. So all she does outside of work is going to bars and drink at counters on her own. That's very much her life. And one day while she's in such a bar, she meets an old teacher of hers, a Japanese teacher she used to have in secondary school. There's a 30-year age gap between each other. And at first they're sort of drinking alongside each other, like barely acknowledging each other, but there's a bond that will happen between each other. And both of them are extremely lonely people. And, you know, when you're in Tsukiko's head, you feel like she's very opaque to herself. A lot of the time, she doesn't know why she feels things, and she doesn't know how she ends up in certain situations. And the only time you get to have a glimpse of who she is when she talks to other characters who know her, and they say stuff like, "Oh, but Tsukiko, this is such a typical thing of you to say. You say those kind of things all the time, or you always seem like you're present physically but not mentally." And get the sense that one reason of her loneliness, apart from, you know, being overworked, is that she's completely unable to connect with people. She's putting up walls a lot. She comes across as really cold without realizing it. And with that teacher, she finally allowed to open herself, and it's the blossoming of a really beautiful relationship between these very two lonely characters. And there's something also that feels very Japanese, specifically Japanese, in this novel to me. There's a strong mention of the passage of the seasons. So there's a lot of description of the trees and how they change. Also the type of food. Like food is a big focus on this book. You see how seasonally what's going on in their plates change. And to go back to the season, there's also a connection with Basho, the haiku writer. So the seasons sort of mirror their feelings in a very poetic way as well. It's such a beautifully quiet book, which is so heartbreaking in its loneliness.
Well, I've been hearing about this book for, I think, almost 10 years or 7 or 8 years, and this is the first time that I've thought it sounded interesting. So you've done a very good sales job, Nora.
Thank you. Yeah, and it was just a perfect transition for me between, you know, Women in Translation and Spinster September. Okay.
Nora, we barely have gotten started on this discussion. I think we need a couple hours to do it justice, but oh my God, I am stimulated up to, what would a spinster say? Stimulated up to my reading glasses.
You're gonna need a good cup of tea after this.
Absolutely, a cup of tea, absolutely, and pet my cat.
Oh.
Thanks so much, Nora.
Thank you, Sean. Really looking forward to seeing what you would be reading this September.
Yes, so this is Spinster September, and it was all I could do not to talk about all the things I would now want to tell you about my reading, because much of my reading is about Spinster September. But Nora is just a delight, and can't wait to have her back on. All right, as in yet another sign that I'm back to full health, I did manage to get 2 videos up this week in between my Friday reads. The first episode of Zooming In that I've been able to get posted for a while, and this was a chat with Mindy from Glasgow about a really fun, kind of pomo, whimsical, but also very thought-provoking article about who is this I that has all these bookish opinions. Check that out. Mindy and I had a wonderful chat about all that. And then I got a book haul video up late last night. And here I am. So, I finished 2 books. And I have started a bunch, and I'm going to tell you about maybe 3 of them, the ones I've started, and tell you about a couple of books I'm going to start in the coming week. The first book I finished was The Leopard by Giuseppe Tomasi di Lampedusa. This was a buddy read with Sonia, of an enthusiastic reader, translated from the Italian by Archibald Colquhoun, however that name is pronounced. And I'm going to quote Sonia, because she nailed it in terms of what my reaction to this book was. She said, I admired it, but I didn't really love it, and that's how I felt. It wasn't really a Sean book. I didn't get particularly invested. It was very well done, and it was about this prince set at the time of the Risorgimento. Is that how you pronounce it?
How do you say it? In Italian, this is said as Risorgimento. Risorgimento.
The Italian unification, Garibaldi and all that stuff, and the historical backdrop of it was quite interesting. I hadn't studied Italian unification since first year university, and that was only about 5 years after the unification happened. So I enjoyed that. I also enjoyed learning quite a bit about Sicily and Sicily's history, because before the unification it had been some bizarre Bourbon kingdom of the 2 Sicilies together with Naples, and it was like to do with like the royal family, old royal family of France, their third cousins were reigning, and it was just ridiculous and tyrannical, and that was all very interesting. But the prince himself, the leopard of the title, I was only moderately interested in him as a character. There was a lot of nuance to his character, but he was just this princely guy who knew that he should be a better person than he was, and he had a very fine appreciation of what was beautiful and of his various lusts and appetites, and he had a secret devotion to his nephew because his nephew reminded him so much of himself, and his nephew had aligned himself politically with the Garibaldians. And so he would go far in the new society, and the prince was just kind of aware that the life he had known was dying with him, and we follow him throughout his life, and I didn't really care about him very much. So I didn't really care for it. I can see why other people would appreciate it more than me. And what I'll say is the final chapter was after his death, I think some years after his death, when his unmarried daughters are living in the same palace that he had lived in, and they are now elderly. I think they're elderly, certainly they're middle-aged, and I found them fascinating. Lampedusa centered them and dipped into their consciousness, and we learned all about them, who had just been seen almost exclusively from the outside in the earlier part of their lives in the main story. And I would have rather that the whole novel had been about them. I often say that women are so much more interesting than men, and that is true, even if I am gay. That's just a fact of life. And I would have liked the whole novel to have been centered on these daughters instead of the old poop. I mean, he wasn't an old poop in many ways, because he was a real sensual kind of glutton, at least in certain aspects. But he was kind of boring compared to his daughters, who had got to... And I wanted the whole novel to be about them, so I would have rather read The Leopardettes. I also finished the Irish novelist Kevin Barry's most recent novel. I believe it was published this year, The Heart in Winter, which is about Irish Americans, and it's kind of a Western. Now, I don't know what a Western is. I think I've read maybe 2 Westerns in my life when I was 11 years old. But to the degree that I'm interested, and I am not very interested in what that genre entails, This was a literary treatment of kind of a Western story, and I'm sure he was doing all kinds of clever things in subverting or interrogating the Western novel genre, but I didn't care about any of that. I loved the novel in a 5-star way because the writing was gorgeous, and I was very invested in the two main characters. It's set in, I think, about 1890. Am I right? In Butte, Montana, 1891, yep. And there is a young Irishman in town. He's working as a photography studio assistant, and he is a dope addict and a romantic, and all the men of the town hire him to write romantic letters to their girlfriends, and so he's responsible for many marriages in the community. And then he lays eyes on, well, an older man, I think he's a military guy, and his mail order bride, and the day after they get married at City Hall or whatever, they come into this studio in Butte, Montana to get their wedding picture taken, and it's love at first sight between our male protagonist, Tom Rourke, and Polly Gillespie. She's just married 10 minutes ago and starts an adulterous affair with our hero. And so they end up leaving town, and they're on the run, and the outraged, newlywed, grumpy old husband who is so religious, he's got that weird kind of, he whips himself in lieu of praying or to intensify his praying. He's that kind of a freak. But he sends a posse out to capture them, and plot ensues, and I didn't care about the plot really, but I loved the characters and I loved the writing so much, and I found out much too late that Kevin Barry, who has the gruffest, graveliest, smokiest voice in the world, does the audiobook. So I'm going to experience it again just on audio to get all of that, but it was a wonderful read, and I'm not going to say any more about it than that. It's the furthest thing from a Sean book that I could imagine being a 5-star read, and it was a 5-star read. I loved it. So that's what I finished. Let me tell you what I've started, and 2 of the 3 are for Spinster September, but let me start with the other one, which is The Stone Angel by Margaret Laurence, and this is for my Patreon book club. We're going to be talking about it at the end of the month, so it's a good excuse for you to join my Patreon at any tier so you can join that book club discussion. This is a modern classic of Canadian literature. As I said last week, I read it in high school. Boy, I don't remember really anything about it. I've now read 30 pages, and oh my God. It's so good. It's just her writing. Margaret Laurence was a Manitoba-based Canadian novelist who died way too young, and I think in about 1980. She was about 57. And her body of work is really at the center of Canadian literature. By page 2, I was smitten. What I want to tell you about this is a rabbit hole moment I experienced at the bottom of page 1. It opens with this 90-year-old protagonist, Hagar Shipley, remembering her mother's grave in Manawaka. This is the mythical, fictional hometown of most of Margaret Laurence's novels and one short story collection. It was a really kind of pretentious gravestone, and in fact, that's the title. The Stone Angel comes from that. So I won't read it to you. I'm tempted to read it to you, but just look it up and read the book. Or at the very least, look it up on Kindle or something, Kindle Preview, because it's a glorious opening to an incredible novel. Our protagonist is remembering her mother died very young, and her Scottish Canadian father commissioned this really pretentious, elaborate headstone with an angel on it from Italy. And this is the sentence. Well, she remarks that the eyeballs on the statue, the angel statue, had been left blank, and she thought that was strange. It seems strange to me that she should stand above the town, harking us all to heaven without knowing who we were at all, because she couldn't see. But I was too young then to know her purpose, although my father often told me she had been brought from Italy at a terrible expense and was pure white marble. I think now she must have been carved in that distant sun by stone masons who were the cynical descendants of Bernini. gouging out her like by the score, gauging with admirable accuracy the needs of fledgling pharaohs in an uncouth land. That sentence itself is just gorgeous. But I thought, Bernini, I think I know who Bernini is, but let's refresh my memory. And so I opened the webpage for Bernini, and oh my God, it's just, one of those moments where your reading life takes you so deep into something that you weren't expecting to fall into. And so Bernini, what Shakespeare is to drama, Bernini may be to sculpture. 1598 to 1680. Born in Naples, died in Rome, and David is a Bernini. When I was looking at pictures during the editing process, I realized it's not the famous David that we all know, but he did do another David, and it's pretty darn good too. And he was actually a rather handsome bloke. Here's his portrait. Well, holy smokes. His personal life was insane. So this is what I read, and it's horribly violent and misogynist and everything. It's just terrible. And because it's so far back in history, it doesn't have the same effect on me. It just feels like a story. And that's interesting, because why doesn't it bother me as much when it happened in the early 17th century? Anyway, he was a single man. He was about 30. Oh no, he was about 40. He was still single. He had an affair with a married woman. Her name was Costanza. She was married to his workshop assistant, Matteo Bunicelli, also known as Bonarelli. Bernini sculpted a bust of his mistress. It's now in Florence somewhere. And then Costanza, who was obviously a bit of a glutton, she simultaneously started an affair with Bernini's younger brother, Luigi. So Bernini himself is Gian Lorenzo Bernini. So his younger brother, Luigi Bernini, and of course, the older brother, Bernini, the master sculptor, found out about it, flew into a rage, chased Luigi through the streets of Rome into a basilica, almost killed him, but didn't kill him. But obviously wounded him, injured him very badly. And as punishment to his unfaithful mistress, who was the wife of another of his workshop assistant, Bernini, the elder, sent his servant to her house, and the servant slashed Costanza's face several times with a razor. So, that's horribly misogynistic. The servant went to jail. Costanza went to jail for adultery. Bernini himself was let off the hook by the Pope. So that's that story. He got married a couple years later, settled down, had a family. His brother, however, didn't wise up, didn't reform his ways. He raped another Bernini workshop assistant 30 years later on the construction site of the Constantine Memorial in St. Peter's Basilica. So horrible and fascinating. I fell into all of that because of the first page of Margaret Lawrence's The Stone Angel. And all of that violence from centuries ago that undergirds all of this marvelous sculpture that's in the world. And this fictional, although it's based on a real life statue, on a headstone in a certain some town in Manitoba, where Hagar Shipley is curious about the fact that her mother's grave, the angel statue on her mother's grave, has no eyes, and the face slashing, and I just couldn't stop thinking and feeling about all that. And so The Stone Angel is off to a fabulous start. For Spinster September, I have started The Mrs. Mallett by E.H. Young. This was 1922, the year my grandparents got married. This is starting out really great too. It's a British family of women. There are 4 Mrs. Malletts, by which I mean 4 Miss Malletts. I guess in British English, at least at the time, they would say it that way, Mrs. Malletts, M-I-S-S-E-S, not married women. None of them are. So far, in the first 30 pages, I've met 3 of them. Carole and Sophia are from the father's first marriage. The father was a general. He's dead. His first wife died. He married a much younger woman for his second wife. She also died, but before she did, there was a daughter from the second marriage, and that is our protagonist. Rose. Now, I'm not sure exactly how old Rose is at the opening of the novel, but she's maybe 20, maybe 25, and the novel confusingly refers to them as step-sisters, but they're not step-sisters, they're half-sisters. I guess those terms were kind of loosely used to mean the same thing, but it's very confusing. But no, they shared a father, so they're half-sisters. But the half-sisters are maybe a decade or so older, and they are confirmed spinsters. And she is, of marriageable age and seems like an independent person. And it opens with one of her childhood best friends, and now they're young adults, proposing marriage to her. And she really likes the guy, but she doesn't love him. She thinks he's a very handsome man, and she's always liked him, but not love him. And so it opens with her rejecting his proposal, and then she goes home for tea with her half-sisters, who are real characters. And one of them had a secret love many years before, where the man went off to America or Canada to farm or something, and then died there very young. And she never told anybody in her family about this love, and she has a photograph secretly in her sock drawer or something that she pulls out in solitary moments to pine upon. The writing is wonderful, and the characters are also already very, very interesting. I have also started an audiobook by Mona Simpson, the biological sibling of Steve Jobs. I talked about that last week, in which I guess the main character, or certainly one of the main characters, is a confirmed spinster, and this is set from the 50s through to the 70s so far. It's called Off Keck Road by Mona Simpson, and I haven't decided if I like it yet. I'm not going to bail. It's holding my interest, but I don't feel invested at all so far in the characters. I won't say much else about it, but B is the woman who never married and never really dated. It's set in Green Bay, Wisconsin. See, I don't know anything about Green Bay. Is that a city or a town? Yeah, it's about 100,000. B goes to Chicago for university, but then she comes back and looks after her ailing mother and becomes a real estate agent. It's like a small town on the outskirts of Green Bay, I guess. Keck Road is set there, and it's a poor district, and one of her friends is from there, and there's 3 women that we really follow. B, her friend June, whose marriage ended early in divorce, and she has a daughter, and then Schlee, who I believe was a high school friend of June's who got polio as a kid. It's all interesting, but I'm not sure that it's interestingly described yet. I hope to change my mind. I'll keep on listening, and that's enough about that. I'm going to start one more book for Spinster September, because when I found out about it just by browsing on Goodreads or something, this is a novel about a tiny spinster, and it's called Spinster Kang by Zoë S. a Chinese-Canadian writer, and it was not published many years ago, but I'd never heard of it, in 2019. And the author, Zoë S. was born in China and had written 3 other books before this one, lives in Toronto. The premise for this just sounds fascinating. The 32-year-old titular protagonist, Spinster Kang, is a new immigrant to Toronto. Her older sister was raped back in China, and because of that, Kang is determined to remain a spinster, even though that is stigmatized. Not as much as being a rape victim was in China, but stigmatized, and she's struggling with her fear and distrust of men. So that sounds absolutely fascinating, and so I'm going to be starting that this week. And let's not forget about another fabulous reading challenge going on for the first time this year, Framed in September, which is a art readathon, reading books about art, fiction or nonfiction. This is put on by a bunch of fabulous booktubers, many of whom are friends or admirees of mine. Lindy of Lindy's Magpie Reads, Elizabeth of Booklands and Books, Hannah of Hannah's Books, Heather Gregg, and another bibliophile reads. So I only have space on my readerly dance card for one, but it's a book I have had my eye on for a while. So I bought it for this purpose, and I'm going to start reading it this week. And that is The Art Lover by Carole Maso. an American novel published in 1990. I don't know anything about it other than it's very much about art. The opening line of the blurb on the back is, "What is the power of art in the face of death?" Well, I don't need to know another darn thing about it to want to dive in. And there is some illustrations in the book and some poetry, and which I don't really like usually, but hopefully it won't be a problem. And some newspaper articles, so it's going to be a whole multimedia affair. I hope to have a preliminary report for you next week. All right, that's my Friday Reads. Thank you so much for watching.